Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. Going live in 5, 4, 3. Okay.
Great. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this lovely March Bristol Schools Forum meeting. Hope everyone's well. We've got a number of items to go through today and some new faces to welcome to. But in terms of how we'll run through the meeting today, hopefully you've all had the papers and been able to access those and read those in advance. Thank you for officers preparing those. We've got a number of items and some verbal updates as well. So hopefully we've got a number of things that we can discuss and contribute to during the meeting. So I'll move on then to item 2, which is an update from Sam with around apologies and some declarations of interest and notifications, and also some new members. So Sam, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for absence. Apologies have been received from Cedric Sandoval, Joe Willis and Adair in Zakova. Chorusy, I can confirm the meeting is chorus. Resignations, we've had resignations from Mick O'Neill-Dove, who's resigned as primary governor, and Richard Pensker, who's left his appointment for as PRU governor rep. But appointment of new members, Steve Hornsby joined us as the new PRU governor rep, and Tonya Hill has joined us, as mentioned at the last meeting, as Schools Forum rep for special maintained. Notifications of vacancy. There remains a vacancy for secondary governor, who has, we have had an advert out for that, which is a closing date of the 6th of April. Once that date has passed, if not filled, I'll start a new process for secondary governor, along with a fresh vacancy of primary governor. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please? Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sam. It was a very helpful update, and a very warm welcome to Tonya, Steve, and also Joe, who is a second meeting. So thank you very much for being part of the forum. Very welcome. Okay, so we've had the paper circulated. So item 3 is to check the accuracy of the minutes. Has anyone got any comments on the minutes themselves? Anything they'd like to feedback? No, that's great. Okay, I'll just take us through some of the actions then. So there's a request around making sure that we've got information around the de-delegation, which has been included in one of the papers later on. So thank you, Angel. We asked for an update on the consultation for the DSG management plan, which we have got, which is the final item. And then we've also got some items on number 5 in relation to the transformation programme update that we requested. And again, that's picked up in the meeting, which is great. And there was also quite a long discussion, if you remember, around early years specifically. And I know there's another paper later on the agenda to discuss challenges within early years. And we're also looking to re-establish the early years working group and also the high needs working group. So that remains a priority for us to consider. And I think there has been some interest in members of Forum in joining those groups. So thank you for that. But it remains open if anyone would be able to join those. They can meet about 3 or 4 times a year. And it's an opportunity for a smaller working group to look into some of the items in a bit more detail. Okay, and final item, which is on page 6, was in relation to feeding back to Councillor Craig, the comments from Forum. So I think in terms of actions, that's everything that we've needed to cover. Okay, so I'll then take us over to item 4, which is again a very warm welcome to our new director, Rena. So over to you, please, for introductions and to take us through the verbal update from yourself.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. So just a quick and brief update around who I am. So Rena Bogle-Welsh, Interim Director for Education and Skills. My background is all secondary education. You know, I'll always say that I'm an English teacher at heart, but my trajectory through leadership through secondary schools was very rapid. I'm very privileged and honoured to have served the children across the northwest of the country. And prior to my appointment at Bristol, I was at the University of Bolton as a director, where I worked in there on education and a variety of projects were held in my portfolio. But I'm very grateful for the opportunity at Bristol, so thank you very much. I'm really conscious around the update, Chair. So I've got a brief update around family hubs. It is very brief, but the main 2 items were around maintained nursery schools and, of course, the high needs block recovery plan. So hopefully I'll be able to touch upon those during my reports. But with family hubs, just a very brief update. Some physical hubs have now been located in 3 different locations of the city. So this is a great piece of work. I know a detailed report was given around that piece of work, but one of the hubs was visited today. So that has started to get up and running, and we can start to see that great work coming into fruition. So if members would like another update around that, I'll quite happily update the forum at the next meeting.
Okay, great, thank you very much. I can't remember who actually requested the information about the Families Hub, but hopefully that's provided a bit of an update in terms of progress around those. Yep, great, thank you very much. Okay, so Angel, I think you're taking us on to item 5, which is the DSG update as at January. And this is for our information, isn't it? And there's also some key items in there I think that's worth us pausing on and discussing, but over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a regular report and gives the forum updates on where we are in terms of the in-year budget position, and also taking into consideration of the the carry forward figures. Mainly is for information only. As at end of last year, our end of year DSG overspend was at £24.65 million. So as at P10, which is end of January, and we forecast an current year overspend to be around £17.2 million, which is a slight reduction from the previous report, which was based on P8, which was around £18.8 million. So there is a slight improvement, mainly due to the reprofiling of a planned spending on improvement programs in early years, and education transformation program now is called Belonging with Send. So there is a table in the report pack on page 10 and giving you the summary position on where we are with DSG. So in-year forecast position of £17.2 million, and plus the 24.6 from the previous year's carry forward. So end of year position, looking at the deficit cumulatively of around £41.9 million. So, and then we look at each of the blocks. The schools block, there is a slight underspend of 557,000 at the moment, mainly from the growth fund. And obviously we are doing the year-end closing at the moment. So the next updates will be in July meeting if it goes ahead, if not in September. We also added an additional section on the schools block, which is the maintained schools forecast, mainly because maintained schools overall was in the surplus position as of last year. However, the position has deteriorated, and there is another table on page 11, and highlighting actually the maintained schools overall financial position will slide into a deficit of £3.1 million if materialized, and which shouldn't be the case. If you look at the table above, we're reporting schools block. We're not taking into account of this maintained schools deficit balance if it materializes. So what we've done then is, we have taken a series of actions to contacting all the maintained schools, informed them to give us the latest updates, and for all the schools forecasting the deficit position, we've asked for a recovery plan, which showing in-year recovery, as well as recover their historic deficits within 3 years, and some of them being offered additional show support despite the packages they bought from TWS due to the the severe financial estimate position, and whereas other schools, if they having difficulties producing forecasts or meeting the financial requirements, they've been offered the slots to see our children's and education executive director and Nursery as well, our director of education. So the key challenges, as you can see from the table on page 11, is that sits within the nursery schools. The good news is, whilst some of the maintained schools are forecasted in-year deficit, the deficit situation should improve in next financial year, because we've had mainstream schools additional grant at around 10.749 million for 23-24, which individual schools' actual balance allocation will be confirmed in spring according to ESFA guideline. And you can also work that out to yourself as well. So that will help the schools, in terms of combating the inflation pressures and the cost of living and utility bills as well. So all of the maintained schools, except nurseries, has actually, forecast a surplus position from 23-24 onwards, which is good news. So this is why we've got improvement programs going on and to help the nursery schools to work through their financial positions. And the next section is about dedelegation, which was an action.
Sorry, Angel. So I'm not sure of the protocol. Do I raise my hands? Can we ask questions during Angel's presentation? Should I wait till the end?
Yeah, if you can wait till the end, Steve, we'll pick up at the very end. And yeah, you just raise your hand, that would be great. Thank you.
And so the next section is about delegation resources, and as per Schools Forum's request in last meeting, quite rightly, you want to know, where we spend the money, where we are in terms of delegation fundings. And this has been ring-fenced, and this will continue to be ring-fenced for the purpose it was intended for. So on page 12, there is a table 3 and highlighting how we spending the delegation fund and where is it been spending to, what's the position estimated as at the end of the year. So there is a balance to carry forward currently at around £500,000. And because we had a surplus balance carry forward at 21-22, so we didn't ask for a school's financial input in schools in financial difficulty, although we did ask for delegation, but we didn't collect the fund from the school, if you know what I mean. And so for that specific purposes really, and everything else will be spent as per budget, as per previous years as well. Yeah. And then we talked about early years in section 4.5, and there's a overspend, mainly is to do early years special education needs and SEND spending on that one. Yeah. And the other element is the planned overspend, which is utilizing the previous year's underspend on early years and the nursery improvement programs, and $250,000 will be delayed in terms of spending. Yeah. And as you can see from the first table I showed you, and the high needs DSG overspent in year 17.2 million, mainly coming from high needs block, which is pretty much come from high needs, of which high needs block, the biggest challenge is in the top-up funding. And current overspend is around about 13.6 million, and if materialized. So we're doing the year-end closing now, so we update you if that position improves. And Rina will have a separate paper on DSG management plan and DBV programs. So we'll give you a bit more details on how we're going to combat the deficit in DSG high needs overspend. So, but I've got a quick summary table on page 13 as well of the information pack, and showing you the DSG management plan, where, you know, from financial perspective, you know, we did forecast at around £128 million cumulative deficit in 27-28. And that forecast has been validated by delivering better value for send and DFE partner Newton, broadly in line with what their forecast is. And we also come up with a mitigation proposal around £12.5 million financial benefits cumulatively at around 27-28. But having worked with delivering better value for send Newton, and they seems to be confident that we should be able to reach the stretch target of £80 million if we tidy up our house. Again, you know, there is a separate paper to give you more details from operation perspective. So, so what I'm trying to illustrate in this table about DSG management plan is, if we continue the overspend and, you know, start working on mitigation proposals in year 25-26, it's likely that we can reach in-year balanced position on high needs. And this is exactly the 3 years gap we have when the statutory instrument got extended, and it's expected to expire in March 2026. So it's absolutely critical that, you know, we move on and get on with the mitigation proposals, and, you know, to improve the DSG overspend position. And there's a little section about the education transformation program. Now it's called Belonging with Send program, where Tommy Jarvis, the program manager, gave us an update in January already. So in summary, DSG is forecasting an in-year overspend about £17.2 million in P10. As I mentioned, you know, we're doing the year-end closing now, so we give you end-of-year position in July if it goes ahead, the meeting is. So the cumulative will reach about almost £42 million. You know, we got about 3 years to fix this problem, and we really need to get on with it, really. Yeah, that's the message. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Angel, for taking us through the paper. Quite a lot to take in there, I think, in terms of different areas of priority and different bits of information. I'll just open up more generally then to any questions or any comments on what Angel's presented so far. Chris? Oh, Chris, are you there?
Hi, sorry, just had a problem with the mute there. Right. Yeah, Angel, just a quick question. Where we've got the primary, on page 11, where we've got the primary balance, it's obviously dropping by, you know, nearly 2.5 million, if I've got that right. Is that because, one, cumulative deficits, and two, some schools go into academy who had surplus balances?
The surplus balances, say if a school gone to academy, their balances will be removed, yeah, from our end of year position.
So that's
yeah.
So that's a combination of the two reasons, because that looks quite dramatic to drop that much.
Yes, it's a combination, but you know, we also move their costs. You know, it's moving their income and the costs. You're absolutely right. You know, if they financially performing stronger, yes, overall, you look worse, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Tonya?
Just unmute. Forgive me, because this is my first schools forum. You talked about the mitigation plan for high needs blocks, so, and the talk about having to move forward with that. So I'm assuming there's a crystallized plan ahead for this, and is it just a case of that it just needs to start, or are we at the beginning stages of actually formulating this? Because from what you were saying, Angel, it sounds like that plan is already been well thought out, and it's just a case of actually actioning it. So I just wanted a bit of clarity around that. Thank you.
There'll be more information from Rena's paper, but my understanding is we have a draft plan. Yeah, but obviously it needs to be consulted with the sector, with the wider public, and agree with the cabinet in terms of detailed implementation. That's my understanding. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, did you have a question? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Angel. On the Bristol maintained school forecast, I think you were saying that now that's going to be in a deficit position, primarily due to nurseries. That wasn't reflected in the P10 forecast. So I was wondering what had changed to cause that to go into deficit.
You mean primary or nurseries? Slightly different.
Sorry, the nurse. If I'm reading the table on page 11,
okay,
correctly, the nurseries was sort of going into deficit for the end of the year, and if I understood what you're saying correctly, was that had not previously been forecast.
It has been previously forecasted, but what's been happening is we're fully aware of the pressures in the sector, so which was kind of like summarized in on page 10 of the reports. The current financial climate the schools has been challenging. We face the inflationary inflation pressures. We're facing the utility bills, going up, and it is not even double, more than double, and these days. And we also facing, primary and that's primary and secondary schools. In the nurseries, we had historic issues with maintained nurseries supplement, which was 98p per hour. That's way below what's needed. So we had a lot of funding issues over the years. But I think the deficit issues has surfaced now is because the overall maintained schools. If you look at the column 4 of page 11 in that table, the overall end of year position is going to deficit. That's what's concerning. And so we cannot afford on that position. It has to be, you're supposed to, we don't have the right to overspend really, maintain the schools. This is where the problem is for the local authorities. And whereas at the end of last year, we had a surplus position of £4.4 million for all the maintained schools, including nurseries and primary and secondaries in the city. But now we're forecasting a deficit position of 3.1, and that's where the problem is. But the good thing is we had a mainstream schools additional grant for primary and secondary schools. That's about £7.4 million for 23-24, and it's been confirmed that will become part of the formula baseline funding in the years ahead. So that problem should not present again for primary and secondary schools, but the nursery's funding formula is slightly different, and still, the rates increase. Well, as at December 16th, 2022, the rate's still way below the market rate. However, in March, mid-March, Jeremy Hunt made another budget update. There are some changes in the nursery schools funding formula again, which is not reflected in this table. Sorry, I should have mentioned that as well. So which should ease some of the pressures, but not all of it. So we still need to come up with a recovery plan. That's what we've been working with many of the nursery schools. Majority of them have submitted their plan now. And we're working through the plan to make sure we're financially sustainable. Yeah. So main problems are, cost pressures, as we know of, really. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Angel. I'll hand over to Abby in a second. I think my reflection on that table is, so for context, Steve, we don't tend to talk about maintain schools balances regularly at Forum. It's more of a, because we're in the position where they're now moving to a deficit, it felt appropriate to bring them to Forum's attention. And the thing for me is, when Simon and I saw it in our planning meeting, is that the size of the number of schools that are actually in deficit. So, you know, talking about 85% of them currently now in deficit, which is a considerable sum. And I know that we've got the additional funding, but that is a one-off injection. I know it will go into the funding formula the year after. However, costs continue to rise. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be, you know, sorted out quickly. But I think there will be continuing work in that space, and that's what Angel and Rena talked about, is keeping that finance support in place to work with the schools to understand what's driving those deficits and what can be done to bring them back into balance. But yes, it's true of lots of academies and maintain schools, I think, in terms of challenging financial situation. Abby, you want to come here, please? Come in.
Sorry, I was trying to get myself off mute. Thank you, Sarah. I just wanted to pick up on a point quickly that was raised in the last kind of discussion, and I think it was just around like sufficiency planning long term. So obviously what we're seeing currently in the maintained nursery schools around deficit, we do have a risk of that impacting all of our schools going forward around placements and as the kind of population changes. So I do think at some point it's a piece of work we're going to have to look at collectively across the Forum. I think Rena is still on the call because I can't see everyone on here, but there is some work that's happened in Sheffield just around that, and I think it will be helpful if that organisation who supported the Schools Forum around that piece of work also comes to speak to us here, just so that we can be a bit more proactive about any kind of future financial challenges that we're going to face, rather than the reactive position, unfortunately, that we find ourselves in currently. And I think the M&S deficit is a really good example of some of that.
I definitely think that would be a great piece of work for us to continue to do. So would welcome it, absolutely. Steph?
Find that mute button. Just to clarify, 85% of the schools are facing an in-year deficit. I may have missed it, but is there an indication how many of those are actually on a cumulative deficit? Because you are right, that's a significant proportion of the schools facing challenges.
I don't have the exact number with me. Yes, we do have that data. Yeah, I can share with you and Steph. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Simon?
Yeah, I just I'm glad Abby brought that up, because that's something that is concerning us all, and I think, you know, maybe it'd be best talked about in the next bit. But I think we got several really major issues coming up regarding early intervention, the strategic role of nurseries in Bristol and the family hubs. And then after the latest budget from the government, which is promising a massive expansion in places for children, how are we going to fill those places? Do we have the sufficiency? Because what we're experiencing here at the moment, and I'll say our nurseries in the most deprived ward in Bristol, and also with the highest Black and minority community in Bristol, and also the greatest level of inequality in Bristol, which was an interesting piece in the Evening Post about the divisions within Bristol itself between the richest areas and the poorest areas. And this area comes out as one of the worst in the entire country, let alone Bristol. So I think there's a lot of strategic questions to be asked, and about funding, support, how we relate and interlink with other services, and they're all there. And we fully understand that, you know, the pressures the local authority are under, the DSG budget's under. But by 2025, 2026, basically, in a way, we got to double the number of places we're offering. And what the private sector is saying is, under the current funding thing, in the most deprived areas, most of them will close. And at the moment, we're getting more and more families coming through the door desperate for places. And I think we're under pressure from every direction at the moment, and I think we play a key strategic role in supporting children and families in early intervention and support, as do all the schools in Bristol. But I think, you know, it's a really big question that we need to kind of get to grips with. So I'm really pleased that Abby brought that up anyway. So
yeah, I think what I'll try and do, Simon, that's really helpful. I need to come and see your school. I think what we can do, and I'll liaise with Brina and Sarah, is I think once the organisation is coming to meet me, because I was recommended by Sheffield, and then hopefully we can get them here, because I think we need to be having these conversations. In a previous borough, we had already started this work, and this was 3 years ago. And I'm very conscious that it's something that hasn't started yet, and it will do. So I think if we can all get behind it and figure out a plan, it will be really important for all schools, especially those in our most deprived areas. It's key.
Yeah, completely support that. I think that would be a great step forward. And I know we're going to talk about nurseries specifically in a second as well, so we'll be able to pull out a bit more information from that as well. Okay, is there any further questions on Angel's paper that's been presented? I just have one specifically around the money that we retain for schools in financial difficulty, because that has been carried forward a couple of years. That's in a dedelegation, and considering what we've just talked about, could you give me an update on how we're planning to utilise that funding? Oh, you're on mute, Angel.
Obviously, there are primary schools they are sliding into, you know, deficits as well this year. So we could, you know, and within the remit of the money as well, we could consider to look at that as an option. But you know, we will welcome any inputs in terms of financial resources, you know, to help the nurseries to improve their financial situation. So it's, you know, this money is ring-fenced. It is not LA's money, and you know, the money is set aside for schools in financial difficulties. Yeah. So, you know, we could look into the primary schools currently struggling as a starting point. Effectively, it's their money, and I would also suggest, you know, obviously with the additional mainstream schools additional grant, you know, majority of the primary and secondary schools will not need that, you know, financial support. Fingers crossed, with good and effective financial management. So with that money sit there, you know, can we, as would the forum consider to use the money to help nursery schools? And that's a question actually, you know, I'm you know, thinking on top of my head, if the forum would consider to use the money for that purpose, really. Yeah.
Well, I think we need to revisit the reason that we retained the money originally, because I know this was agreed by forum at least 3 or 4 years ago, and it's just been held there and we haven't revisited it. So I think it's probably worth us just checking again why it was retained, just so we can make sure that we're representing all the voices that agreed for that delegation initially. But if we make that as an action, to take that one away and bring it back to the next meeting with a proposal that's in more depth around that money. But I think it's been sat there for a while, so I think we do need to consider what to do with it that's going to have the biggest impact. If the other forum members are happy with that approach, we'll bring it back to the next meeting. Great, thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Angel. That's a thorough paper.
Thank you.
There's no other questions, then I'll move on to the next one, which is item 6, which is the maintained nursery school transformation programme. And Rena, I think you're taking us through this one, please.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. So I know that the purpose of the report is to provide the update around the Maintained Nursery Schools Transformation Programme, but specifically also speaking about the dedelegation of the £90,000. So the funding was there to address the financial challenges, as well as looking at financial operating models that would work for the nursery schools. So the report will provide an update around how how we spent the money, the overview of the progress, and of course its impact. But I think Simon made the really fair point around the nursery schools in Bristol, you know, they are an integral part of the infrastructure of the city. They serve the most poorest wards of the city, as well as our most disadvantaged students and our children. So they're there serving our most vulnerable families. And I think, you know, the position that we're in, it's worthwhile noting that we do want to support nursery schools on their journey with this. And it is important that this is a joint relationship between nursery schools and the local authority, and that we work together to ensure that we create a healthy financial future for all of those nursery schools. So I'll take you through the current position. You know, the expert is Angel around the figures and the finances. But as of Q3, we know that 11 of our 12 nursery schools were forecasting that in-year deficit, and around Q3 that deficit position was at 1.9, just over 1.9 million, which would have a cumulative end-year deficit position of 7.1 million. Angel outlined that, you know, that financial climate is challenging at the moment. We all know the reasons around this, the historical patterns of funding, people numbers, post-pandemic impact, you know, the rising costs of staff, inflation, energy costs, you know, that cumulative and collective effect does have a significant impact. So the council's therefore forecasting that cumulative net deficit of 3.1 million at the end of the financial year for 22 and 23. The financial health of the maintained nursery schools is the primary driver around the cumulative schools deficit. And it's important that we acknowledge that the transformation project does have potential to have wider impact. And I know this was discussed at a previous schools forum around recruitment and retention, but I just wanted to make the pertinent point around it. You know, Angel touched upon the process that has happened following the Q2 forecast of the in-year deficit. So all local authority maintained schools were notified of a deficit recovery plan being required for this month to reflect the ESFA's latest funding announcements and to have that clear strategy around how maintained nursery schools were going to bring their deficit into a surplus balance position. And correct me if I'm wrong, Angel, but as of the date of writing the report, all schools had returned their recovery plan apart from 2 schools. But it is clear what we're having to do as a result of if nursery schools don't engage with us, which could result in a notice of concern being issued. The most pertinent point that I do want to make is we want to work with all nursery schools. They are being supported through the process. I know finance colleagues have also supported, as well as our early years colleagues, and our project support officer has been working quite closely with those schools, not only on their financial position moving forward, but ensuring that those plans, whether they're draft, that they are submitted and that the team can work with them to ensure that they can come into fruition. So the current funding, section 5, I know that Richard previously outlined that maintained nursery schools are constituted at schools, which comes with its own costs, because you are required to employ a head teacher, qualified teachers and SENCOs, and the early years national funding formula doesn't recognise those associated costs, which does add more financial pressure onto those schools. The release of the block allocations for the hourly rates will increase. So for our 3 and 4-year-olds, that increased by 6p, but that's equivalent to 1%. Our 2-year-olds will have an increase of 9p, which is just over 1.5%. But those funding doesn't necessarily equate to the costs that come with the increase of living costs, and those pressures outstrip the increase in funding levels per pupil. So it's worthwhile noting that although it sounds great, actually in reality it's not adding a benefit to our provision and what we're able to do. So whatever uplift that we do receive, you know, we are grateful for that, but we've got to ensure that we can support maintained nursery schools with restoring their financial health, and we want to do that together. We've outlined the progress to date, And Chair, I believe that this was one of the actions that wanted to be followed up around how the £90,000 had been spent. So what we've done is we've provided a breakdown of those costs. We initially appointed a project support officer to work alongside Maintain Nursery schools on their transformation programme. That work started back in October last year, and the aim of that project was to maximise their income, but to also look at their operating models such as federation. But fundamentally it was to be more cost effective and how Maintain Nursery schools could move forward with an in-year surplus. So the table in section 6 outlines how the funding has been spent and the activities around that, and hopefully that breakdown will provide an idea as to what work has been completed to date. What I do want to point colleagues to is the section at the bottom of the breakdown of the £90,000 around the early years send money that was agreed by Schools Forum to address the growing deficit. Those costs are indicative at the moment, so I'm quite happy if Chair you'd like me to come back with a more detailed plan around how that money will be spent. But at the moment they are only in the proposal stage, and they're currently being scoped to develop more clearer objectives and obviously ensure that we've got those milestones where we can measure the impact around it. But I'll quite happily come back to colleagues and share the impact of it. I think what I wanted to share with colleagues is around the next steps and what will happen with the programme for Maintain Nursery schools. So obviously all of the deficit budgets will be supported by the finance officers to ensure that those 3 to 5 year plans are demonstrating that return to surplus. We've got a consultation out at the moment around 3 of the Maintain Nursery schools. Some work is currently happening with some governing bodies in the south of Bristol, but that is yet to be shared publicly. But once it is, I'll update Schools Forum around that. We're continuing to look at the operating models for the remaining nursery schools as to what would make them more financially stable for the long term. And then of course, looking at the continued leadership support, as well as any ongoing training and development of leaders, school bursars, to ensure that robust forecasting can occur. So in essence, 123,000 out of the 340,000 of the early years send nursery improvement funding has been utilised, and the remaining balance will be ring fenced for this purpose and the continuation of the work. But Chair, I'm open to take any questions, any that I can't answer. I will definitely get back to members. I've been here just over a month, so I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but I will definitely ensure that I try my best to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Rena. I think that's a really helpful overview and bringing us up to speed around how that money's been spent and the plans for the future in terms of supporting our Maintain nurseries. I'll open up them more generally for some questions. Tonya, I think you're first.
Hi, yeah, I was just interested in especially this send part of the plan and if there are any other colleagues from health and social care that will be part of that as well, because again we were talking about how important nurseries are in order to make sure that they've got that early help and so on, and I'm just wondering what their input is to all of this, because we know that early help, especially from all of those partners, mean that longer term we don't have an impact kind of at primary and at secondary and so on. And so I'm just wondering what their input is into this programme.
Yeah, I think it's a really fair question, Tonya. And I know that Abby's very clear around how we work across directorates and how important it is not to work in silo. For any work moving forward in terms of education, we will obviously be speaking to colleagues from health, from children's social care as well, and ensuring that we're looking at that bigger picture and the wider impact that it has. We're definitely not the experts as a directorate, and it has to be a holistic view that we take around the child to ensure that what we do moving forward only ever supports that in the best way possible. So yes, in short, we're working with other colleagues to take on their expertise.
Oh, I'm muted now. Simon?
Yeah, it's just two questions. I mean, when are we like, I mean, I think it's more probably for Angel, but when are we likely to hear back from the local authority about the recovery plans that, or attempted recovery plans that have been submitted? And so that's just literally, you know, we've put it in, and of course, like with it, these are all put in before the latest government announcement on budgets, and of course it's so, you know, you do something and it's changed like 10 minutes later. And I also, I don't know, I can't question this. I read somewhere, I think from the DFE, that they were intending to put a 30% increase in the 2-year-old base rate funding, which of course again is a significant, would make a difference, not enough, but there's a lot of different factors coming in. So I think the recovery plans are going to be like they're not like a one-off thing. It seems to me they're going to be a sort of developing process as political things develop and other things develop. But, you know, obviously I understand we've got to start somewhere. So we've put in a start. Where do we like to get a response?
Thank you, Simon. Yeah. We did have a plan to, you know, finalize the next step by the end of March, because, you know, that the new financial year starts next week. You know, we want to have everything in place by the end of March. And then you hear Jeremy Hunt's, you know, and brilliant ideas about early years. So what I've been asking colleagues is, you know, last week, the minute I heard it, saying, oh, can we do a high level impact assessment on financial, you know, additional funding possibilities? But when it first came out, we were not in the position to make that impact assessment. So obviously, with all these additional information come out, you know, we need to do that high-level impact assessment. So in-year deficit, you know, is about £2 million. What does the latest announcement mean to us financially? You know, I was hoping to get back to all the nursery schools once we've got a high-level school for all the nurseries in Bristol. It's equivalent to X amount of money, and then taking that £2 million in-year deficit into consideration. And what does it look like? What we don't want to do is, you know, base as is incomplete information and going back to ask you to do X, Y, Z. But what our so we need to do that assessment first. Yeah. Obviously we're gonna be in the year end and yeah, next week. So there'll be delays on that, and Jane's team will be working. And Jane's schools year-end closing is on the 11th or 12th of April. So it's likely that we'll get back to you by the end of April. That's what we're hoping to achieve, and take into consideration of the impact assessment then. But there will be exceptions to certain schools. They will, you know, they're not in a position to turn around the information. For the ones we have got the information, we are doing the due diligence and doing the RAP rating, and the next step is for us to report back to RB, to Rena, and to Denise Murray, and then you'll be formally notified of the outcome. Yeah.
Thanks. There was one more question. Well, it's not a question. I mean, it was really good to hear Rena say about how nurseries are recognised by the local authorities being an integral part of the city, and sometimes, you know, that's good. It's actually good to hear that, because sometimes you don't. It feels, it's sometimes felt that hasn't been the case, but it's really good to hear that it is.
I'm sorry.
And it's also very good to know that, I mean, the support that we're getting is really, really helpful, because nursery schools are small schools. We don't have big departments. You know, our school business managers trying to do this and 55,000 other things at the same time. I mean, it's a lot of pressure. So, you know, really grateful for this additional funding. And I think we're going to need it for a while longer, actually, because I think this process isn't going to be quick. I mean, I went to the first family hub meeting today, which was actually really encouraging and really good to think, well, that's actually something that's happening now. There's people sitting around a table in Barton Hill, and we're talking about integrating services and how we support each other. And this is the very first step, but it's very clear from the very first meeting that there's an awful lot to do to get it to where it needs to go. And that's a strategic thing which will require a lot, I think, a lot of wider support to do that. So, I mean, my question really is, will we get it?
Okay, well, in short, yes, we want to support nursery schools with the process. I think it's being really clear around what that support looks like, you know, and being honest and transparent with leaders. You know, however much we'd like to wave the magic financial wand and resolve all the financial issues, we're not in a position to do that, but we will be supporting nursery schools in the various capacities that we can.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Simon. It's good to hear from you specifically, because I know you're currently facing it at the moment, as are others. And it's good to hear that the support so far is helping towards managing what is already a tricky situation. So that's good to hear. Simon, you did have Eakins, you did have your hand up a second ago, but you put it back down. You still want to ask something?
It was similar along the lines of what Simon just asked. Really, when I read the report and say, you know, see what actions have happened with, you know, I was expecting to see more like coming out with recommendations, but it sounds like, you know, rather than the report just saying, you know, we're still working with the nurseries, but with that work, I would have expected to see some recommendations. But I think what Simon's saying, you know, that those recovery plans are in the process at the moment. So I think it's probably answered my question.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Steve?
Yeah, it looks like the transformation program's made a good start, so that's good. I wondered if the team have identified operating models or best practices, schools that are doing really well with financial sustainability that could be cascaded more widely.
Yeah, that's definitely a piece of work that the team are looking at. It's not simply just looking at one type of model, and I'm very aware that might come across in the report, that it's just this, the federation is almost key. That's not the school of thought, I can assure you. You know, best practice is the best way to move forward, and looking at what has worked with similar local authorities as well, and that's had that long-term impact where nursery schools have been positively able to move forward. So in short, yes, it's not just about one operating model. We've got to look at what works and what works well in a sustainable way.
Angel?
Sorry, I can't find the raise hand button in Zooms. Just want to add, you know, in one of the next steps in Rena's paper, so we talked about trainings, and I've already invited one of the very experienced business managers. When I was reviewing his school's, you know, financial performance, they're doing really well, and he's done a lot of fantastic things to turn the financial position around within Bristol area. And I was like, you know so much, you've done so much. Let's share it. So yeah, there will be some training sessions for school leaders and business managers to share best practice. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Right, are there any other questions or any other comments anyone would like to make on this item? No. Okay, well, I think it's a really helpful update. I think it would be great if we could keep it on the agenda for next time as well, so we can get an update on how those meetings went, you know, the communication at the end of April that Angel mentioned, and if we've got a bit more clarity around how we'd spend that $250,000 as well, Rena, I think that would be helpful too. So if we have maybe a short paper or verbal update, whatever seems appropriate, but if we can aim to have that on the next agenda, next meeting agenda in May, that would be helpful. Okay. Thank you very much. So then the next item is number 7. So the high needs block deficit management plan, recovery management plan. And Rena, I think that one's you as well.
Yeah, back to me. So I'm aware from previous schools forums that my previous colleagues and my predecessors have presented the programme, so forgive me if I repeat anything, but I wanted to just ensure that I was transparent and honest around the work that we've done. So the report outlines the DFE DBVs, the Delivering Better Value in SEND programme, the High Needs Block Deficit Recovery Plan, the overarching governance of the DSG, and of course within that the High Needs Block deficit management approaches. So as everybody will be aware, the programme around DBV has been in motion for quite a while, but I wanted to draw everyone's attention to section 4 to give an update around what's happened since my predecessor has spoken about this. So completion of that 6-month diagnostic period, we've got some great news, and it is a good news story that we've secured the just over £1 million grant for a pump prime deficit mitigation interventions. The diagnostic work that happened with Newton identified that over the next 5 years what the unmitigated deficit position would look like, and it is that large figure of just of 160 million, and that's the lower bound. And that increase in spend is for a number of reasons. You know, the increase in the number of EHCs, the non-statutory top-up funding within mainstream provision, our specialist provision, and of course our post-16 provision. I won't go through it all, but the diagnostic also identified the drivers for that increase. And I think, to name but a few, that increase in demand for EHCs, you know, there's been an annual growth for our EHCs, our education healthcare plans, resulting in that 51% increase in total of high needs block spend between 2019 and 2022. You know, our limited inclusive practice in our mainstream settings has resulted in the number of EHCPs in mainstream settings increasing. And of course, we've got that increased spend in our special schools, and they are just a few, and the rest are outlined within section 4 on page 2. The work that we've done with Newton within the Delivering Better Value has identified 2 clear work streams. And that first work stream will be about strengthening our relationships between schools, families and children, and fundamentally improving that experience that our young people are having within SEND in mainstream settings. And work stream 1 will be cross-phase. And I think this is where working on our relationships with families will be pivotal to the success of this work. And then we have work stream 2, which is about strengthening the relationships between schools and the wider system. And a lot of this work will focus on the non-statutory top-up funding model that currently exists within Bristol. And I'll touch upon the comments later on in the report that came out from a wider engagement piece, particularly around work stream 2. I want to be, you know, very transparent with forum members around some of the feedback that we've had, but of course that was also outlined in the engagement report that was submitted as well. We've got some lovely graphs that have been included in the report, and those graphs simply indicate what would happen if we did absolutely nothing, what would happen if we did everything in terms of every single mitigation and everything that Newton have outlined. And then, of course, what would happen if we did what was within our means to realistically complete with this work. And what it does is it provides a breakdown of the movement of the cost savings that would be created. And I do want to draw forum members to the fact that you'll see from the table from 2023 to 2024, it doesn't actually look as though there's been much of a predicted or proposed saving, I should say, but there does appear to be a larger jump that Newton have worked out that would almost kick in from that 2025 point onwards to ensure that we can demonstrate the savings that we need to, as Angel clearly outlined, that, you know, we're working within that 3-year window. And that's where we've really got to demonstrate the work around the DSG and what the delivering better value will do for us financially. The 4 separate work areas, I know, was something that, Chair, you asked for a breakdown of the work that we're currently doing and what sits within it. I'm very conscious that the DBV is one element of our DSG mitigations, and the delivering better value won't have you know, this whole massive impact. It's got to be delivering better value plus the other pieces of work that we commit ourselves to that will have the financial impact required to ensure that we're in a better place. So we have obviously the DSG management plan, we've got the delivering better value, we've got the high needs block deficit recovery plan, and then of course we've got the belonging with SEND programme. And I know that an officer has come to Schools Forum, I believe, to speak to you about the work that's been completed. But this is another good news piece of work that is happening with belonging with SEND. You know, an update was given in January, but at the end of this month, we've got a final closing round for schools who were bidding for some money around early language development programs specifically. So that round closes at the end of this week, but we've had some real interest from schools to be part of that and to be part of the Belonging with SEND programme. And some of that early language development work is in conjunction with the Education Endowment Fund, and working with some of our South Bristol schools as well. So where we can look to offer some training, CPD for staff, and then we can really take a look at that intervention, that impact right at the starting point, rather than almost looking at how we can recover from our financial impact. So the Belonging with SEND programme is definitely grassroots, on the ground type of work, where we're getting in, working with schools, and working with teachers and working with leaders as well. Following our planning conversation, Chair, we've outlined at the bottom of page 5 the work that we've that sits within the DSG management plan, and then whether that's business as usual or where that fits into the different work streams. But I think it's fair to identify what the outcomes that we're looking for with this piece of work. And on page 6, they've been outlined in a few bullet points, but fundamentally it's got to be increasing the number of children's needs being met through SEND support. I think being honest around the number of children maintaining their position within mainstream settings, and making sure that we get that offer right in terms of our ordinarily available provision as well. Increasing the number of parents who agree that their child's needs are being met, and families feel that we are meeting the needs of young people, as well as, you know, taking a look at our post-16 offer, you know, making sure that we do have that sustainable non-statutory top-up funding model, which I know everyone will want to know how will that work and what will that look like, as well as making sure that we've got that robust monitoring and that financial accountancy as well. So what colleagues have done is they've outlined the funding and how money has been spent to date in section 6. So what we've tried to do is take a look at the education transformation programme that spanned from 2019 through to 2022, and what that funding looked like, as well as how reserves were used, and then any ring fence money for transformation. There was an £820,000 carry forward that's been committed to school-based inclusion projects within the Belonging with SEND programme, and I wanted to draw forum members' attention to that. And then if the table on page 7 takes a look at the DSG high needs budget ring fenced, and how that will be spent. We've also got the high needs block 1.6 million, and how we will be spending that. And then of course we've got the DBV grant, and how we will start to use that for work stream 1 and work stream 2. I wanted to just explore and just discuss very briefly around the engagement work that I touched upon, because the engagement work that's been completed to date, there were mixed responses to work stream 2. You know, non-statutory top-up funding will obviously draw a lot of attention, and what I want to be honest about is making sure that we get this right, and that the work that we do around it, that we take on board, you know, how families are feeling around this, what school leaders require from us around this. And what we are saying is the engagement piece was about the options. It wasn't, you know, this isn't concrete in the fact that this is what we are going to do. You know, that consultation period does need to take place. And we do need to offer that out to ensure that we're consulting with everybody around this, because I do understand that this is quite a sensitive issue that needs to be handled quite delicately, but also with a real sense of understanding around the needs of the children and the young people of Bristol, taking on board feedback from families around their thoughts around non-statutory top-up funding. But everybody was in agreement that this is an area that we do need to focus on, because this will be one of the biggest, I would say, areas to support the mitigation work that we're currently doing. So the next steps around this would be to go to consultation. And I think, Tonya, forgive me if I've got this wrong, but I believe you mentioned earlier, you know, how would this work? Options do need to be drawn up, and then we need to have a detailed implementation plan that sits within this. And then obviously we then need to take that out to consultation so that everybody knows, you know, what we're planning to do and how we're planning to spend the money, to ensure that we don't simply just remove a process. Because I think from learning from best practice, I think, Steve, you know, this is where best practice kicks into it. Looking at other local authorities where they've simply just withdrawn non-statutory top-up funding, what's actually happened is there's just been a huge increase in their EHCs. So I think this is about doing what is right at the right time for the right reasons, and taking that on board. You know, I will always profess not to be an expert in this area. That is why we're working with an external company, and we've gone out to take a look at who would be the best to work with within the financial envelope that we've got, and then obviously scope that work out and make sure that we've got our milestones in place so that we can hold ourselves to account, and bring back all our feedback, but also where we're up to Schools Forum, so that we can share that progress with you. So, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rena. I think that's a really helpful update. I think when we met, we talked about how there's been lots of different programs and different work streams that we've talked about over the last couple of years for Forum. So having them summarised into those 4 to then make sure that we're reporting using that terminology going forward, I think will make it a bit more accessible for members to engage with and know where we're spending the money and what the potential impact could be. But I know there's a number of hands up, so I'll open up for questions. Tonya, over to you first, please.
Yes, I'm just looking at the plan. It's very personnel heavy. So in order for this to work, you'll need quite a robust workforce in order to make sure that these things are being done in mainstream school. And I wanted to raise a point, first of all, that mainstream, I mean, I'm coming from a special kind of background, but mainstream colleagues work incredibly hard. Yeah. And there was just something about the terminology there, and I know it wasn't meant to be that, but it did make me go, oh, okay. And it was something around the fact that, so there was the first thing where it was around, just trying to get back to it now, around the limited inclusive practice in mainstream settings, resulting in low number of children with an EHCP EHCPs in mainstream settings. It's not through lack of will It's actually making sure that there's enough people with that expertise to work in there. And I think we need to reflect on the fact that we are in the middle of the worst recruitment crisis in education since World War II. I mean, that's been out there. There's figures about recruitment being at 40% still, vacancies not being filled and so on. And so for this project to work, there needs to be something about recruitment and trying to make it attractive for people wanting to be in education to do all this piece of work. And I just want it noted somewhere that this project looks great, but it will fail if we don't recruit enough people, because at the moment we are completely understaffed at the moment. But this is I know it's a national picture, but is there any plans within this mitigation to actually increase the workforce and the quality of the workforce? Because again, it is contingent on people doing this work.
Yeah, no, great question, Tonya. And I think, to be fair, it's not something that sits within this piece of work, but it does sit within the local authority, and we are actively working on this, and we are actively looking at what would be the best plan to move forward around recruitment. You know, you've made some really fair points. I'm not going to come back on those or rebuke those, because they're exactly what I would say in your position. But we do need to be taking a look at what that plan will look like. And there are officers working on that. And we're taking on board, and you know, I've just jotted down some of your comments already that I can take back. And you know, it was never the intention to suggest or imply that colleagues in mainstream schools are not working to the best of their ability. You know, I'll apologise quite publicly if it came across that way. That's not the intention. You know, as I've said at the beginning, I'm a teacher. We work incredibly hard, and so do leaders as well in the schools. But yes, in short, we are looking at our recruitment. It won't just sit within the delivering better value, because it's not just within delivering better value within SEND, it's within the entire workforce of teaching as a whole. But yes, in short, we're looking at it.
Thank you. And just to note as well, I didn't think it was, I was just reading it like that. It could have read that way, but I trust that you weren't trying to insult anyone or anything like that. I just want that noted as well.
No, thank you, Tonya. I'll be more conscious of my semantics moving forward, but thank you, I appreciate that.
Great. Right, lovely, thank you both. Melanie.
Yeah, my question's sort of a bit more specific really about workstream 1 and how you will identify the schools for the workstream 1 pilot. Just thinking of, I know several times we've already mentioned South Bristol schools, but obviously SEND is an issue across the whole city, and just how you would identify schools for that pilot. And then in terms of the partnership, sort of what that would look like. It's maybe a bit too specific for this forum at this stage of the consultation, but that's just my question really about that workstream 1.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair to say that to identify those schools, you're right, it's not just, sorry, everyone keeps jumping around my screen. It's not just the South Bristol schools that we'll be working with. This will be obviously across the city, and it will be utilising the diagnostic work from the organisation that we choose to work with, but we're not yet sure which schools will be selected. It will be part of the scoping work that we continue to do. And then obviously what we will want, Melanie, is that range of schools that we work with, because that will be the most fair process that we could offer. And the second part of your question, I'm sorry, could you remind me?
I suppose just coming on the back of what Tonya said, just what that kind of support would look like, because yeah, I'm imagining that there would be extra, you know, inevitably be extra workload for schools who are sort of involved in that kind of a pilot.
Yeah, and I think this is where we start to utilise, you know, our improvement officers within schools, and as Angel said on the screen, whatever exists within my financial envelope to ensure that we can make this work. But in short, it's about using what we have to do the best that we can for the young people of Bristol and committing ourselves to that. You know, this is a wider than education directorate type of work, and I've got to draw upon a variety of colleagues across the different directorates to ensure that I'm implementing the best programme that we can to have the impact that we're looking for. But as soon as we get into that consultation process, you know, this will be where we'll be able to present more detail, and I think that will be the fairer point for me to share that back with you, Melanie, and colleagues, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I've got sort of two questions, a general one and then a more specific one. First of all, this is all sort of reasonably new to me. I'm sort of new to the forum. So I like the diagram on page 9. It sort of appeals to the planner in me, I guess. However, I'm just trying to get my head around themes, work streams, initiatives, work areas, approaches, and schemes. And I guess you know, so if I look in the governance section, I've got, it says there's 4 separate work areas, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I've got a table below which identifies various things, but I can't map back to 1, 2, and 3, 4. And it maybe it's not really my understanding or something, but maybe something even further could be done to try and show how everything fits together.
Okay, Chair, I'll work on that. We can, would a glossary help to streamline it? I mean, Chair, I will take your lead.
Yeah, I think we'll take this one away, Steve. I think the diagram is actually very helpful because over the last couple of years, we've seen a whole range of different initiatives and different programs, different terminology. And I think this helps to summarize it in one place. I think we'll take it away, and Rena, you and I, we can think about if there's another way that we could perhaps present it so it's more accessible again. But I think this is definitely a good step forward.
Okay, so the second one is, if I'm sort of trying to understand the table at the top of page 5, and then I can see there's an initiative around A1, 2, and 3, which I think is about more students supported and fewer independent placements, which appears to be driving the biggest benefits, a sort of cumulative benefit, maybe 40 million. So where does that then fit into, say, the table below? So I can sort of see that. Is it in workstream 1? Is it specialist provision? Is it places?
So it would be within, oh, sorry, Steve, didn't mean to speak over you.
That's it, sorry. Yeah.
It will be within our specialist provision.
Yes.
And taken, essentially, if we get the right specialist provision in place, then there will be less of a need to go into those INMS placements as well, which you're right, create the highest cost and spend. Yeah. But this is where our sufficiency work really kicks in, that officers have completed around it. But yes, it would sit there.
Okay, yeah, that's.
I think in terms of some of the tables that have been shared, Steve, that's the outcome of the programme, you know, the analysis that's been completed by the external parties. So going forward, I think we'll have a different way of reporting it. I think that's what we're saying, aren't we, Rena, going forward? So we'll try and, we've shared the outcomes and the potential impact if we proceeded with the findings, and then going forward, we'll use something that's a bit more accessible, I think. Great, thank you. Tonya?
Yeah, it was just to talk about the earlier agenda item about the schools' deficits and how this fits into there as well. So if we're talking about some schools are going into a deficit, and obviously they've it was announced yesterday about the unions offers with schools and so on, and the fact that schools are expected to fund the increase in pay and things like that. I know it's going out to consultation and so on, but there's a lot that's being asked of schools, which is great because they're the ones that have got the expertise and so on. But I'm just wondering again how this fits in, given that we've got schools going into a deficit budget potentially, and we're trying to reduce the high needs budget. I'm not seeing how they kind of marry up. So for instance, I can see why on that table on top of page 5 about trying to get more pupils in school rather than independent non-maintained schools. That's great, but if that need could already have been met with the existing provision, then we wouldn't. Then the local authority wouldn't have been going out to independent non-maintained schools. So how is that provision going to be there if we've got increases in pay that aren't being funded by central government, if we're trying to reduce the amount of top-up funding? I'm still a bit confused about what this will look like. So there is a little bit part of me that is looking at this and thinking, great, but how is this going to be funded? And so that's the question I'm asking, really, if what we're trying to do is reduce the amount of funding that's in there.
Yeah.
And so that was the first question. And the second was, you talked about other stakeholders in this, and I think this comes more into this part rather than the early years. But is there any kind of discussions with health and with social care about this helping to reduce the high needs budget? I know it's education based, but if you were to look at some of the things that were going on in there, could that somehow be picked up by their budget streams, or is this completely? I'm new to this as well, so that's my experience.
So am I, Tonya. But no, I think I'll try and answer question 1. So in short, and please forgive me if my memory doesn't serve me right with the question, or I've got my answer modelled up, but in short, the maintained nursery schools deficit and the work that we're doing around the DSG and the mitigations that exist, fundamentally there's a deficit as a whole, so irrelevant of which maybe pot it falls into. I think what it requires is a very clear plan that we've got around those maintained nursery schools to bring that deficit down and those maintained nursery schools into a surplus, and then a really clear plan around how we bring those DSG mitigations into play, and how we ensure that we're not increasing that deficit even further. The windows for those deficit recovery in both elements are slightly different. And Angel, you might be able to support the technical aspect around the maintained nursery schools because of the ESFA and what exists around that. Our timeliness around that has got to be quite imminent, and we're working quite quickly to ensure that all maintained nursery schools are working within their license. Whereas with the DSG and the window that we're working with around that, it's slightly longer, because within our first year, and I'd like to make this really clear to forum members, we're not going to see much movement within year 1 of the DBV programme, but it will be in year 2, year 3, and then all the way through to 2028, if I'm right, Angel, where we'll see those mitigations come into play and where we'll see that deficit decrease. So yes, there is a deficit as a whole, but we're working within 2 different windows, and we've got to have 2 really clear plans around it. And I would say what marries them together is the fact that we're in deficit, rather than they both integrate with the programme. I think if anything, that does crossover between one and the other will be the work that we do specifically for SEND. And that's where you'll have that element of crossover, Tonya. But no, that's fair. It was a fair question to ask, and hopefully I've answered your question.
Well, I suppose what I was asking really was, given that schools are feeling the crunch financially, and the plan is predicated on schools kind of trying to help reduce the high needs deficit, how is that, given that their resources are being kind of squeezed?
Yeah,
we're trying to get more bang for our buck with less resources, is what it looks like. And so I'm just, and then with the recruitment crisis as well on top of it, I'm just wondering, so again, if I go to a specific example, I think that always helps with specifics. So as I said, the more students supported in SEND support, that was at the top of page 5, and then looking at the potential savings and so on, but that is predicated on having the right staffing there to be able to do it. More pupils, more students supported in mainstream schools, fewer specialist placements. Again, that requires having the right level of support within those schools. So what I'm saying is, given that the climate is saying that potentially some schools may be going into a deficit, that it looks like the increases in teachers' pay are not going to be fully funded by the government. That's certainly what's been put to the table at the moment. Is there anything in this plan that looks at that? Because, yeah, it's just, it looks like from the outside, it looks like schools are being asked to do more with less to try and reduce the high needs budget. I may have got that wrong there.
Can I add a comment?
Yeah.
And thanks, Tonya, for raising that. The school's cost of living crisis and inflationary pressure has been addressed by government, giving us additional grant from 23-24. Unfortunately, 23-24, they're not going to backdate the payments for current financial year. The £10.749 million beginning April 2023 next financial year. So that will address a majority of the cost of living and inflationary pressure for the schools. Obviously, we have to, keep an eye on that and making sure we meet our ends. And then there are new, negotiations going on in terms of teachers' pays, other elements of, unexpected. So schools still need to have a contingency plan. And this is why we requested all the schools to submit a robust finance plan and do the due diligence work to taking, that unexpected into consideration as well. This is one of the key reasons why, schools needs to spend the money wisely. But for now, the mainstream schools' additional grant should ease the financial pressure in primary and secondary schools. That's what I'm saying. And going back to your question about reducing high needs budget, actually, our high needs budget, we're not trying to reduce the spending, but it's trying to get us to the sustainable stage. You're absolutely right. The number of children with EHCP plans are increasing. However, is the expensive placements we are putting children to are very expensive, and children having to travel very far from home as well. That's another cost pressure to the local authority. Put the money problem aside, and from the child's perspective, the experience of being away very far away from home, and and having traveled this far every day is not great. So what we're trying to do is looking at what can we offer the children better experience, and can we meet the needs locally, for instance. And we spend the money wisely, and actually you stretch your money further. That's what I'm saying. And that, to a certain extent, mitigate the increase in volume as well, without compromising the meeting the needs at all. And when the schools take on children with mainstream schools taking on children with special needs, there will be additional top-up funding in addition to the place funding you're getting. And so you do have the top-up funding to this is what the high needs top-up funding is for, to follow the child with the needs. So so the school with good financial management shouldn't lose out. But recruitment will be an issue. You're absolutely right. You know, staffing will be an issue. Yeah, but in other local authorities, it worked. You know, so we should, you know, we have 3 years, and we have, you know, had the external diagnosis. We should really just give it a go. That's all I'm saying. But we have no alternative but really give it a good go anyway. So
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Angel. I think,
Yeah.
Tonya, I think you raise a very good point. I think this is going to be a continual challenge because, yes, we're getting some more funding from the government, but then already yesterday, the Teachers' Pay Awards were announced, and we need to foot the bill for the majority of that pay award, which may be affordable, maybe not, and we need to do that analysis and understand where it's coming from. So I think we have to recognise that we're definitely in challenging financial times, but we do need to take some action. So we need to just make sure that we are doing it in a way that's the best for the children of Bristol, but also to think about how we do that to support each other as well through this process, and learn around how we can do this really effectively while still meeting need.
And I think that's the main thing. And Angel is right. We've got to do something. And I think I just wanted it noted that actually it's complex, but you're aware of that anyway. So
yeah, it's very complex, but it's always right that we recognise the position that everybody's in, I think. So thank you for raising that. It's a very important point. Right, I think Simon, you are next.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, one of the things that sort of concerns us, and I think I've raised it before, is the amount of time parents are having to wait to see a paediatrician or speech and language. And I think the thing that just came through about basically closing down the referral system for children with autism. So you can't even get on the waiting list. Now those children are coming into schools. We have lots of, and I think everyone would agree with me here in the schools. We're seeing more children coming in with more need than we have in the past. And there's obviously complex reasons for that. But it seems like, I think it was Sirona, they did this whole thing and there wasn't consultation, from what I read, with the local authority about it, on the impact that was going to have on parents and schools. Now, one of the things that Bristol has been asked to address by Ofsted is relationships with parents around SEND. I don't see how this kind of thing is going to help, where basically you can't get a referral. You can't put these children, you know, where do they go? And there was a big question and answer thing came out, and for things to ask, and most of the answers were, sorry, we can't tell you. And I read that and I was thinking, well, how are we in this situation where this can happen? You know, again, I think that is to do with how we join up with the different services, how we work together, how they support us. But it seemed this whole thing went through without anyone in the local authority knowing about it. I thought, you know, these things are all impacting on real children and families now, and they're the children that are coming through our doors, and these are the people that we're talking to every day. And now having to say, well, we can't refer your child, there is no pathway for them. I just wondered if there was any kind of feedback on that.
I can't speak on behalf of Sirona,
No.
Simon.
But it has impacted us. It has impacted schools, and it is impacting parents.
I think what we can do, Simon, is note that you've raised it, and then we'll take it off outside of this meeting to follow up as appropriate. Okay, in terms of who we need to contact around it. But Rena, if you're happy to take that one away, we'll follow up as we can.
Of course, Chair.
Thank you. Steve.
Yeah, it's not a question, it's more a suggestion. So I mean, this seems like a really important programme. It's multi-year with the benefits ramping up in later years. So what's worked for me in a previous life is to be able to have some leading indicators, so things that show you on track to achieving the benefits, which are useful for the confidence of everybody, because the benefits won't be there in year one, they're going to be in year 2, 3, 4, whatever. And it's really good if you can say, yeah, we're on track to doing it. So that's it.
No, thank you. And I'll go back to colleagues, Chair, because that information might exist, but a month in, I might have just missed that. But no, colleagues will definitely have that information. I can bring that back to the forum. That's not a problem. But thank you, Steve. I appreciate that.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that would be helpful to understand where we are in terms of progress against all those measures and having some targets against them. Thank you, Steve. I think that's helpful. Jo?
Thank you, Sarah. I was really just trying to raise the same query that Simon had. For mainstream primary school, we are seeing an increase in children coming from nursery with high needs, additional needs. And I think we are still in a post-COVID world, and the impact is still ongoing. And we are going to see that, you know, for our cohorts going all the way through. And we don't know when that will end. You know, we, like Simon said, the fact that we've been told that basically we can't refer any children now on the pathway. So there won't be any professionals coming in to work with those children. That means then that we're not able to get the evidence to put to top-up panel to get the additional funding to support the children that need it, you know, and then the implications on staff who are then working with children who have additional needs and are on the front line, and that's why there's a retention crisis, because, you know, staff are coming into work and they are being hurt every day in work, you know, and the support from specialist provision isn't there because the resources aren't there, the financing isn't there, so it seems to be a secular situation, and, you know, saying we're going to reduce the amount of children who are, you know, reduce the amount of high needs funding. I agree with Simon, really is probably going to create more problems in the short term and could lead to less retention of staff in mainstream settings. You know, with regards to sending children to independent settings, the places weren't there. They haven't been there in the local authority. They haven't been there. You know, I had a pupil who waited 5 years and they now are taking a taxi to Stroud every day to specialist provision. And of course, nobody wants that. But, you know, like Steve was saying, if there was any indication of the extra places that are now available, so that we're more aware of that, and what, you know, with the Belonging with SEND programme, how far that's progressed, where the additional places are going to be, what the focus of those additional places, you know, for instance, SEMH, there's a massive need for SEMH provision, and some update on, you know, where we are with that would be really useful.
Yep, I think we can definitely take that one away and bring that to the next meeting, because I know we've shared it previously in a previous forum meeting, and I know there's lots of work that's happening in the background in relation to providing specialist places, resource spaces, etc. So yeah, we can definitely take that one away. Thank you, Jo. But I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Rena, or we can just bring it to the next meeting.
No, I'll bring it to the next meeting.
Thank you. Okay, right. Well, thank you, everyone. I think that was a really thorough discussion around what is, you know, an emerging piece of work that we'll need to spend more time on at future meetings. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to raise on this particular item? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Rena. That was really helpful to provide that overview. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Chair.
So that takes us then just to any other business. There is one that was raised in advance, just bear with me, for a member who wasn't able to join. Was in relation to finance support around top-up funding. This is in relation to a particular trust. where they have a number of specialist academy trust where the top-up funding, there's some pupils that no longer enroll, however the top-up funding hasn't been clawed back yet, which is a significant amount of money, I think 800,000. So that's quite a specific request. So Angel, if you could take that one away, I think I'll send you the email in relation to the request, but it's a specific one that someone's asked us to raise. And just wanted to highlight that one. It's not necessary for now. Are there any other items of any other business? Okay, well, thank you very much to the new members, very welcome, and thank you, Rena, at your first meeting, and it's great to meet you. And thank you very much, everyone. I hope you all have a lovely evening. The next meeting is in May. I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.